I refer to as a three-tiered layered cake of trauma-informed careness. And the first is to be trauma sensitive. And what that means is that everybody in the agency that's serving or interacting with any human, including colleagues, has been through a day where they explore and connect with the impacts of trauma on humans. It's often very helpful to have different role types in the same room because what you're doing is you're giving everyone the same frame, the same point of reference. There's a lot to learn about how trauma impacts humans. And so that's one of the first things that we recommend. And then the next is to make sure that you have practices in place for those direct service providers to be trauma informed. And that's the next layer of the cake, as you can see here. And our take on that is what I shared with you in the last webcast, which is to hold space for those that we're serving, and to also have a way to hold space for each other, which we'll get into later on today. And then the last is to know what interventions are available in your area that really help the person heal up this wound of trauma. And Marianne gave a sense of that in her overview of how art therapy can help with that, as well as a lot of other evidence-based practices that have been identified to heal up trauma. Just got to give a shout out to Dimitri Tepitsis out at UW Milwaukee, who came up with this concept. I don't think he calls it the three-layered cake of trauma-informed care. I think he has a better term for it. But so that's where that comes from. I found it a helpful concept in regards to how are we going to create the servants environment? Well, we're going to do that by having each role know what they need to do in order to be trauma-informed.
One of the things that we're going to be talking about next is what are the ways that people cause each other pain. And specifically, we are looking at what I refer to as intentional trauma versus unintentional trauma. So for me, unintentional trauma would be like a car accident or cancer, which are traumatizing events. But what we're looking at specifically are the intentional ways each other. And we're going to ask you, write a few things down. What comes off the top of your head? How do people cause each other pain? And, you know, be specific. Try to see how many different ways that you can come up with. Hopefully you came up with a few ideas of how people hurt one another. And what we're going to show you next is the house of essentially power and control. Some of you may have heard about the wheel of power and control, and we put it into a different form because people grow up in this environment, right? So some of the ways that people hurt each other, physical violence, verbal or emotional violence, psychological, like mind games, humiliation, shaming, etc., intimidation. A lot of threatening going on. Once someone has used physical violence, an intimidation gesture does a lot to cause pain. Isolation, sexual power and control, and sometimes it's not only looking at forced sex, but it can be look at refusal of sex or someone who maybe cheats on their significant other in a relationship is all considered sexual abuse. Financial, withholding money, identity, putting the kids in the middle, neglecting the kids, the absence of not knowing your child, like the leaving, one parent, spouse leaving and not coming back. So these are different ways that people hurt each other. And a lot of times that is clouded over by drugs and alcohol. And in this image, we have this cracked foundation because truly that feels like a cracked foundation of what these relationships can be. So imagine a child growing up in a household like this. What are some of the adaptive behaviors that anyone living in this household might have developed because of the trauma that was being inflicted on them? And adaptive behaviors are, quite simply put, a set of behaviors that a person develops when there's adversity in their environment, whether it's home or whatever. Just kind of take a little bit of time and think about what are some things, maybe you've seen it, maybe you've experienced it yourself, or you know someone who's experienced any one of these abuses in a household, and what are some of the things that come out from that environment? What does a human does what they do to survive. So that's what the adaptive behaviors are. We learn how to trust no one. We learn how to hide emotion, or how to control others, manipulate others, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I noticed when I worked with kids in a domestic shelter was that they learned how to hide better. They learned how to, like, if they were to get in trouble, they learned how to lie very well. So, and it wasn't that they were bad kids, but they knew that the repercussions of whatever it was that, the abuser thought they had done or were doing wrong would be quite severe. And so the kids would learn how to hide what they did so much better. I worked with an adult client recently, and we did some work around her childhood trauma and abuse. She grew up in a house that looked like this, and she ended up, having a very successful career as an ER nurse. And as we looked back on, what were some of the things that she might have learned growing up, she was in a much different place of learning more positive things about these negative experiences. And she attributed her critical thinking to the abuse that she experienced when she was growing up. And the reason she contributed this is when her parent, the violent and abusive parent, would escalate, she said she can just picture herself sitting on the stairwell, taking in all the details of how do I survive this? How do I hide? What needs to be done? What's the distraction method? And that this actually played very well into her being an ER nurse, because she was forced into critical thinking by the nature of her job. And this is one of those ways that I call it paradoxic learning. She learned something positive out of adverse events. So I've worked with a lot of women who learned that their own bodies, because of sexual abuse, were just objects, and so they disregarded their own bodies. I've worked with women who have become prostitutes or sexual workers because of that there was no regard, that this was something sacred, and it just seemed natural. Like, who cares what I do with my body? It's just a thing.
And so when it comes to those adaptive behaviors, oftentimes they show up as, or it can be termed unhealthy out in the world. And I really learned this concept from a Vietnam veteran who I had the chance to hang out with when I was in grad school. And he would share stories of his experiences in Vietnam as an 18-year-old. And as we were talking over coffee in a nice little quiet coffee shop, it became very clear as he was talking that he had never left Vietnam, that he was still behaving in the ways that he had to while he was there. He wasn't able to let go of that armor, of that plaster that we explored in the last module. And so when those adaptive behaviors show up as unhealthy, then our job is, or our recommendation is, to hold space for the person so that they can return to themselves and start to behave in a way that they have always intended to do, and that they can learn how to let go of those adaptive behaviors, or, as Marianne pointed out, adjust them a little bit so that they become more of a healthy behavior that helps them get by in the world. And we reviewed all that in the last module.
As you were talking about how this might show up in the people that we serve, the first one on this list, the trust no one, really lends itself to why there's so much importance put on holding space.
Yeah.
So if you grow up in an environment like this, it is really hard to trust other people. You don't know what their reactions are going to be. You don't know what their actions are going to be. You don't know what their intention is. You question all of this stuff. And so if a client is sitting before you for whatever reason, whether you're, in job service or social work, therapist, etc., that first survival adaptation is to, I'm not going to trust you.
Yeah.
And I don't feel safe. Immediately, I don't feel safe. And these are the behaviors that are coming out. People need to feel safe in order to just take that next step forward.
Yeah, to get to that place of vulnerability, healthy vulnerability, where they can share out what's going on with them. Absolutely. And but we want to check in about sanctuary trauma, which is actually a thing. And you can see it's defined up here. So there's a story of a person that I knew that when he was, 11, 12 years old, had to go to the hospital a variety of times for various reasons, nothing significant. But he felt very safe there and taken care of. And then on his last visit, a nurse came in and said, "It's time for your bath." He's like, "Nah, I'm good. Don't need a bath. I already had a bath." And she says, "I hadn't given you a bath yet." And then she went on to sexually assault him. And there's more to that story, but that gets at what we need to hear, in that when a person comes to us, they expect to be treated in a safe way, just like Marianne, for purposes of what Marianne just said. And when that doesn't happen, then obviously we're re-traumatizing them. And it doesn't have to be as explicit as the example I gave, but it can be implicit. It can be showing up as judgment. It can be showing up as blame and shame. As we explored in one of the modules, I believe the first module, this concept that people already have the voices of shame and blame going on in their head. And so if we come along and add to that mix, or part of the team does, then that's unhelpful. So I want to put you in the mindset of a 17-year-old young woman who recently found out she's pregnant. She smoked a little pot over the weekend, and she's going to the doctor Monday morning, and because she wants to do a good job and build a healthy baby and take care of herself. And then she sees this on the door: urine drug screens will be performed on all new OB patients. If it is positive, random screens will be done throughout the pregnancy and on hospital admission. At the time of delivery, if there have been any positive screens, social services and child protective services will be notified. Just a show of hands, who's showing up for their appointment? Yeah, so we want to pay attention to what's on the walls, what's on the front door. What does the notice look like? Does it look like someone put some effort into making this notice, or does it look like someone scribbled it out? Because all of these are details. And someone I happen to know says a lot of times that love is in the details. And if we want to show our clients that we care for them, then we need to pay attention to the details. When I was running pretrial, so it's kind of like probation on the front of the case, there was a case manager who was an awesome case manager. And she had this poster on her wall. So she would sit here, or the client would sit there, and this poster was right behind her, so the client could see the poster. The poster was of a mom in a disheveled kitchen with a baby in the high chair, just their diaper. There's a bunch of food kind of spread out, and the mom is smoking a crack pipe, right? And this was an alcohol and drug unit. And so we sat down, had a chat about it, and she came to identify that that was a shaming image, and that we wanted to put up images of growth, of moving forward, of moving to new and exciting and different places. So it's important that we pay attention to what's on the walls. Now, here we have a physical setting. Now, let's say that we don't have $500,000 to rebuild this, so the walls have got to stay, the glass has got to stay. So what can we do to make this more appealing, more healing focused, more trauma informed? Oh yeah, we can put a plant in the corner. We can put little sticky decals on the window. And if you peer in there, you might see a smiling face behind the window. And that's the least that we can do. So just looking at the physical setting, going, okay, how is this trauma informed? How is it not trauma informed? And what can we do about it? Pretty simple. So our invitation to you as a bit of homework is to go back to your physical setting after this call maybe, and just peek around, and like you're a brand new client, never been there before, scared out of your mind, anxious, very alert. And what do you see? What do you notice? What might be a trigger for you? Have fun with that. So we also wanted to share with you how we experience trauma-informed care. So when I first started learning about trauma-informed care and sharing it with others, it was all about the impact of trauma on humans. That was the bulk of it. And then as I started to learn about trauma-informed care and what it really meant, I'm like, well, there's really many parts to this. And the three essential parts are having an awareness of how trauma impacts humans, trauma awareness, and then also how are we delivering our services in that three-layered cake that I was mentioning earlier. What's most often is this third little bubble, and that's why we kind of pull it out, and is that how are we taking care of ourselves? And the reason for that, as you would guess, are these things. So if we were in a room with you, I would ask you, what do you know about these things? And what most rooms say is that, well, we've experienced that. We've experienced burnout, we've experienced compassion fatigue, we've experienced vicarious traumatization. And, they can happen on their own or integrated. And, because like burnout, I'm getting a little fried, so I'll take a personal day, I'll take a day off, I'll go for a hike, I'll go for a bike ride. Compassion fatigue, I'm giving it out, but I'm not putting it in, right? And so what helps us fill up our compassion bucket? What are the activities that do that? And we're going to do a little something with that in a second. Vicarious traumatization. So over the course of time, during our time together, I probably mentioned Jasper Mountain Center, Residential Treatment Center for kids 4 to 12, severe experiences of trauma. I still remember going down to the main office to read up on the file of an 11-year-old girl that was this thick. And now it does not impact me in an unhealthy way, but if it did, then that would be vicarious traumatization, where I experience the story of someone else, either them telling it to me or reading about it, and I start to become impacted by it. So,
well, and vicarious traumatization will show up, and we're going to talk about triggers in a little bit, but it shows up almost as a trigger, like you're having an emotional response to something someone else does, and is experiencing, and when you look at that, it's an unresolved trauma from your own past. So for instance, if I grew up in a household that had any of those aspects of the power and control, right? Psychological, physical, etc. And now I'm working with clients who that's what they're working through, are their childhood traumas. I may find myself being emotionally impacted by that. I may find myself, crying. I may find myself feeling hesitant. I may find myself throwing my own story into the mix. And that's where we recognize vicarious traumatization, is that as they're telling me something, I'm picking up on the emotions of it, not in an empathetic way, but taking them on for myself.
yeah.
A story that I can share about vicarious traumatization is I spent a couple of years working in Children's Hospital, and I had a child of my own. I still do. And she is now an adult, but at the time she was 16 years old and she had just gotten her driver's license. And I went I was working in the trauma unit on any particular day, and in had come a young girl who was 16, just gotten her driver's license, and she had pulled out of her driveway, did the looking both ways, and didn't see a truck coming over the hill and had been T-boned.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was a really traumatic accident, and all I kept thinking about was, this could be my child. And when I came home, it stuck with me. And then I had a difficult time. Anytime my daughter wanted to drive anywhere, then I was all of a sudden like, I'm going to be in the passenger seat and I'm going to be your little nag. Did you look both ways? Did you see that? Where are signs of danger? And what I recognized, and still recognize now, is that was vicarious traumatization. That experience of the child in the hospital hit too close to home to where my own child was.
Yeah. And, one of the things that you're getting at is something that you brought up in the first module, and that is the concept of scripts. Mm-hmm. And so the other way that I think you indicated that we can become vicariously traumatized is if we've experienced something similar, and if we haven't gone through the process of healing the wound up. So I don't have to have experienced something similar, such as with your daughter in the car accident at that point in time, and then but I can still become traumatized by it. But if I have experienced something similar, this can be a trigger of that invisible wound unless I've gone through a process of healing it up.
So, when we're in the work environment and you're working with other people who may or may not have been traumatized, but we're assuming that they have. Everyone has little traumas or sometimes big traumas. How do these show up for you? You know, how do they show up in the work environment? And this is really important to pay attention to, because when we're at work, the work that we're doing is powerful and meaningful and should have some purpose to it, which we'll get to later. And when we dread going to work, you know, if I'm just not looking forward to going to work, I'm trying to think of all the things I could do to call in for the day, or if I leave work and I'm exhausted, right? But it also shows up like gossip at the water cooler or bad mouthing your boss. It shows up in high turnover rates. When people are dissatisfied with their job because of burnout, they're not being recognized. They feel that they're not being recognized for the work that they're doing. When they have compassion fatigue, they're not receiving enough positive feedback in or taking that self-care. And so they feel that the environment has done this, right? And so it creates what we would call an adverse working environment. I don't want to go in, I'm resisting that. And eventually people may start looking for different jobs. It can relate to physical illness. You know, when we carry stress, our muscles tense up. So maybe back problems show up or migraine headaches show up. It can lead to mental illness, a sense of feeling overwhelmingly sad or anxious. I'm getting anxious going into work. I don't want to do it. I know what the day is going to be like. And sometimes it can lead to coping in unhealthy ways. So many times, even in my own work environment, you know, we'll talk about Friday where we're all exhausted and I'll hear things like, yeah, I'm just going to go home and pop a bottle of wine. Well, having a glass of wine is fine. But when you're talking about, I'm going to, you know, have the whole bottle of wine as a means to cope with being tired, that's an issue. So whenever we use alcohol or food as a means to cope, that's when we have to recognize that there's an issue. Like if we have a glass of wine because we enjoy the taste of wine, or we're having, you know, a bag of Cheetos because, oh, I don't know, we like orange fingers, that's okay. But if we're saying like, I can't cope right now, I just need to like drown this out, that's a maladaptive coping strategy, and one that will not benefit you. It is actually a sign of being burnt out. Another way that this shows up is that we find ourselves being triggered, that all of a sudden the boundary between the care provider and the client or the person we serve seems to have disappeared. And I may not realize that I'm carrying this weight with me. I may not realize that I'm being triggered.
So that's why it's really important that we take care of ourselves and each other, which we'll be getting to here in just a moment. And so Marianne just brought up the concept of triggers. And so I'm just going to read out this list and see if it sounds like a trigger to you. Disrespected, rejected, vulnerable, weak, ashamed, inadequate, ignored, judged, insecure, dependent, used, unworthy, stupid, neglected, excluded, misunderstood. And so the question becomes, you know, how do we avoid our clients experiencing this from us? And also, when have you ever felt one of these things because of how a client was working with you, or a colleague, or a boss? Yeah. And oh, I know I have. I experienced triggers as weeds. You know, it was nice a couple days before we set this forth, and I went out and I pulled the weeds out of my garden. And the following week I went back and here's that weed again. You know, it keeps popping back up. And so unless I can get at the root of the weed, and the root of the weed, as you may know, is very kind of windy. And so there's a little story that goes along with this. So when I was growing up, my dad had an airplane, and this was a Volkswagen with wings. It was a very small plane. And I'd be up 15,000 feet in the air in this Volkswagen with no problem. I've walked up very tall mountains. I have been in very tall buildings, no problem. And then years later and years ago, we're taking the kids on our first family vacation to Toronto, in which that's the CN Tower. It's 1,500 feet off the ground, glass elevator, glass floor. You go up and you see Toronto. So walking up to the elevator, get in, doors close, about 15 feet off the ground. I'm like, why is it that I'm starting to have a mild panic attack? Never had one in my life, only knew of them because of what I do, but there it was, you know, breath was shallow, heart was racing. I'm like, what's going on? And I'm stuck in this elevator going up, 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 up. And we get up to the top, the doors open, the kids spill out on the floor, wee, and I'm pressed up against, the wall going, good times. So got through it, got down, started to wonder about it, what was going on there. I've never had this, happen before. And as soon as I thought, could it be this moment that happened 7 years previously that has nothing to do with CN towers, glass floors or glass elevators? Could it be that moment? And as soon as I named it, the symptoms dissipated almost to zero immediately. I take that experience and I apply it when I get triggered. I'm like, okay, I'm getting triggered right now. What is the root of this trigger? And when I'm able to identify the root of the trigger, it's less likely I'm going to show up as judgy, blaming, shaming to my clients.
Yeah, very good. I mean, once we can identify what the root of the trigger is, oftentimes that it's sort of like a practice in being present. You realize that the situation you're in is not the situation that had happened previously, and you can come back to the present moment.
And the other thing that you're bringing up for me is that if we have all been onboarded in this team of mine, and we recognize that it is human of us to be triggerable, and we recognize that maybe we're on shift and someone's getting triggered about something, having this language to share with them without feeling that they're being judged so that they become defensive about it, but just saying, hey, I'm noticing this. We all good today? Something going on? That sort of thing can be super helpful, because it does take all of us to help us, move through some challenging days. So we've got a bit of optional homework for you. And so you've received this handout, and on page 2 of the handout, you'll see a trigger assessment. So it's pretty simple. You go through this list of terms and identify whether it's not an issue, a so-so issue, or a very serious issue. And then you kind of pick out one of the higher end issues, the 5 or 4. And on the next page, on page 3, you select one. You consider what is the root, and you kind of go through this self-reflection process using these prompts and identify what you want to do about it. How can you go about healing up that wound, whether it's a significant one or a teeny one or somewhere in between, so that you're not as triggerable? Because I don't know about you, but I know it's not fun when I get triggered, and I don't like to have these buttons on me, so I like to kind of sweep them away as much as I can. So that's how that works.
So one of the things that can happen in the role of being triggered, or even in the role of being a service provider, is that we can take on some unhelpful roles in the dynamic of the relationship. And this is really important to address. It's called Cartman's drama triangle. And it takes all 3 parts to work. And the key in there is drama. And when we have a past that came from a house of power and control, there tends to be a lot of drama, right? There's a villain, there's a victim, and there's always someone who needs to come in and rescue whoever that is. And as a care provider, as a service provider, sometimes, the people that we serve can pull us into those roles. Accidentally, through their adaptive behaviors, right? And it's a tough place to be, because to a large degree, many of us who enter into service roles of helping other people, guiding other people, it's very easy to fall into the rescuer role. I am going to rescue everybody. And I can speak of that of my own work. When I first entered into this world, it was like, I am going to save you all. It's superhero therapist to, I had a list of superpowers, right? And what that did is created victims out of all my clients. What a horrible thing. Like, why are they the victim? And if they weren't the victim, then they were the villain. I mean, it was an unfair hierarchy that was created by my idea of rescue. And once I learned that, this is not at all what we do, we're guides and not rescuers, it shifted that and broke down the triangle. So this triangle needs all 3 pieces to work. It needs a victim, it needs a villain, that was a hard word to say, and it needs a rescuer. And once we recognize what role we have taken on, or what role we're being pulled into, or what role we're witnessing, we can start to break down that triangle, and it disappears. All of a sudden that role is no longer, and there's less drama. Like, there's less triggering, there's less work that needs to be done, because we've started entering into being a guide. So When we're looking at unhelpful roles and our relationship that we have with clients, Sean and I have some optional homework for you, because who doesn't love more homework? It's a handout that you've received, and what you're going to do is just kind of go through and fill this out as best you can. So maybe there's someone that you've been triggered by, like a person that you serve, or maybe it's someone that you know, and feel free to use a pseudonym, that you're really having an adverse reaction to. And try to figure out, like, what are they doing or not doing that's triggering you? Try to remember what that person's story is. If you don't know, feel free to inquire, like, tell me a little bit more about what's going on, because they're having a reaction that is an adaptive behavior based on their story, and something is triggering that. And what do you need to do to be released from this, from whatever role that you're in, if you're the villain or if you're the victim or if you're the rescuer? If you're feeling the adverse reaction, chances are you're the villain. So what can you do, or what do you need to do to release yourself from that role? All right, so we talked about this a little bit earlier, and we're going to go into it a little bit more here, but measuring caregiver fatigue. How do you know when, you're experiencing caregiver, when you just give and give and give, and you're not feeling like you get anything back? And the two questions for me that often come up are, how do I feel at the end of the day? Like, am I exhausted? Do I want to be left alone? Am I looking to pop that bottle of wine or eat that bag of Cheetos? And more importantly, how do I feel at the beginning of the day? Have I had enough time to decompress in between the end and the beginning? Have I had enough positive things happening in my life? But really, how do I feel at the beginning of the day? Am I dreading going to work? Am I tired? Am I fatigued? Am I already overwhelmed before I enter into the office door? And at the end of the day, am I just so exhausted? And I'm just going to throw this in. I had a really great supervisor when I was a very beginning therapist, and I took on that role. This was back in the days of, superhero therapist with the rescue role, right? And I had a hard time saying no. I had a hard time saying no to clients. If they'd say, well, can I see you next Tuesday? And I'd say, I couldn't say, like, no, I'm booked for the day, or if I did, it'd be, well, can I see you next Wednesday? No, I'm booked for the, I would just say, well, sure, I'll fit you in at lunchtime. I was fitting people in to wherever I could, wherever had a free space, because I wanted to help as much as I could. And I think that's a common response, especially to newer caregivers, providers, service providers, is that, we are helping beings. We naturally want to help others. This is part of, I think, what makes us human. And when we first start out and we don't have those good boundaries, we have a hard time saying no to the time restraints of the workday. So anyway, my really great supervisor would come in and she would say, Marianne, I need to look at your schedule, because I noticed that you're a little bit grumpy when you come in the morning, and you seem exhausted at the end of the day. Like, I was staying late because I couldn't get my paperwork done on time, because the time I was taking for paperwork was now occupied with clients that I couldn't say no to. And, so that would keep me there longer. So she said, let me take a look at your schedule. And she literally went through my schedule and just would X out clients. No, 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 no. And she'd say, you're not allowed to work during your lunch break. Lunch break is for casual conversation and decompressing. You're not supposed to be working here. And then she'd say, see these half-hour slots? These are for, paperwork. You're not supposed to fit clients in there. So she said, I know that you're having a hard time saying no. So I'm going to have our, office assistant call these clients and reschedule them for you, which was so helpful, because that was the last thing I wanted to do. Like, oh no, I have to call them and say I made a mistake. But this was her great way of making sure that I wasn't going to experience caregiver fatigue, that I wasn't overextending myself, that I wasn't dreading coming into work because I had overloaded my work schedule, and that I wasn't exhausted at the end of the day because I had not taken the proper breaks for myself.
Thank you for that. And I love how simply you put it, because, there's some very helpful, tools out there that measure caregiver fatigue. But if it's just me and I don't have time for the tool, here's a great way to do it. How do I feel at the end of the day? How do I feel at the beginning of the day? And then move on from there, address it from there. Yeah, and the other thing that I really appreciate too is, the simplicity, right? Going outside, standing up from my desk. We were doing a Zoom training the other day, and there's about 25 of us on the screen, and all of a sudden this woman stands up behind her chair and she starts just stepping. And I'm like, that's brilliant. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for modeling to all of us that we need to get out of this chair once in a while and move around a bit.
Oh, and I'm going to add something right to that, and I think it's coming up in the next slide.
What is it?
I shouldn't tell you. I'm just going to leave it as a teaser. Is that we can model good behaviors for our coworkers. If you see a coworker who's working at their desk, say, hey, come on, we're going to eat outside for a little while. Or like I have a coworker that usually on Tuesday mornings we have about a half hour free, and she'll say, did you bring your tennis shoes today? Let's go for a walk. And all we do is we walk outside, we circle the building. That's all the time we have, and we come back in. So we can turn to our peers and our coworkers to help us to not get caregiver fatigue. We can lean on them as we spend so much time with them, and they can lean on us. So we can model those behaviors. They can model it for us. We can model it for them on how to have a healthier work environment.
Absolutely. And it's really about supporting each other to give ourselves permission to do what we need to do in order to be able to show up for our clients, and especially our grumpy clients, so that they can experience the safe harbor we've been describing throughout our journey on these webinars. And so toward that end, what we're going to share with you is this concept. So as Marianne was just sharing, you are holding space for the people that you serve. And sometimes somebody needs to hold space for you. And sometimes that is your team, and sometimes it's a supervisor. And so what we're going to explore now is this concept of reflective supervision, how we share it, but in the context of just using it colleague to colleague. So you don't have to be someone's boss to do this. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, so I'm going to do the old TV thing where I'm going to tell you what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you it, and then I'm going to tell you what I just showed you. So as I said, this doesn't have to be about just the supervisor to team relationship. It can be about any provider to provider relationship. But reflective supervision is actually a thing, and that you may be aware of, and we don't have a sufficient amount of time to go into it. But what I will tell you in regards to leaders, there's these different types of supervision. There's administrative, which is, are you filling out your time card, putting in your mileage sheet, those kinds of things. There's clinical, where we're staffing cases and making sure we're providing the best care for those that we serve. And then there's reflective supervision. And reflective supervision is we carve out 8 to 10 minutes, 15 if you can manage it, for the folks that we supervise, that we lead, and just allow them to share out whatever they want to. I shared this in whole with a county behavioral health division, and they had me come back for a refresher, and the topic of the refresher was, how do we manage conversations where people are bringing in things from their personal life? And this is actually a very positive outcome, because what it means is that the culture is becoming so infused with this concept of healing focused care, this approach, that people are showing up and able to express their vulnerability at work. Because guess what? If your team is not sharing that there are things going on in their lives, especially nowadays, it's still happening. And so if we give them a chance to unload it in a safe space, that can be very helpful to not only maintaining the team, but also in regard to the delivery of services. Now, in regards to retention, which has come up throughout our time together, there's a piece of data that I wanted to share with you that was very impactful to me. And that is that if I'm a kid in the foster care system and I have one case manager, I have a 76% chance of permanent placement. If I have 2 case managers, I've got a 15.3% chance of permanent placement. If I have 3 case managers, I've got a 5.7% chance of permanent placement. And so retention of the team not only helps out with the energy of the team and the culture and moving forward, but also impacts people's lives. So that's one of the reasons why I believe this is important. So what we're doing when we're applying this concept of holding space for each other, again, colleague to colleague or supervisor to team, is that we are behavioralizing the spirit of it. We're holding space for them. We're behavioralizing the spirit. So when I'm a supervisor of a team and I'm applying the concepts I'm sharing with you right now to the team, I'm modeling for them on how they want to be. And one of the beautiful quotes from Jerry Paul in regards to reflective supervision is, do unto others as you would have them do unto others. And that's how this design came about. So you're being compassionate, accepting, partnering, and at times evoking, as we explored in the last module. This again aligns with a trauma-informed implementation in regard at the values level. These this MI approach, holding space, trauma-informed care going together like this. So, our job again is just to actively listen, learn, and demonstrate deep understanding. And sometimes that's all we're doing when we're holding space for each other. We don't necessarily need to do a lot of guiding. Usually the person has their own ideas that they can come up with, and we'll get an example of that here in a second. We're using the same verbal behaviors to express that spirit and to hold space as we explored in the last module. And we're also going to share information in partnership as we did in the last module, and you'll get an example of that in the demo I'm going to share with you. We can use the grounding techniques with each other. I'm going to share out a structure with you this conversation that you'll also have in your handouts. And one of them is just announce, one word that describes you right now. This gives us a sense of how discombobulated our colleague or our team member is. And then we can apply a grounding technique as needed. So with that little intro, I'm going to share a demo of that with you, and then I'll share out what you just saw. So do you have something that you wanted to check in about?
Okay, I was trying to think of like a time in group that didn't go as planned.
Sure.
And I think one of the most recent things that happened was that we were doing meditation. I have this person who will not participate in meditation. Not only will not participate, but will keep eating, keep drinking. It's not like a helpful thing. Like, he's not just being quiet and sitting there. And
you kind of feel like he's pushing back at it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, in kind of like a passive aggressive way. So meditation ended. I asked him about it, and I said, I don't really. It doesn't matter to me that you aren't doing meditation, but it does matter to me that you're disturbing other people from doing meditating. Mm-hmm. And we kind of went in this back and forth about why he doesn't want to meditate and how he thinks that it's wrong because it's an Eastern philosophy and we're not from the East. And so it was this back and forth, which I was really unprepared for, because I kind of thought, meditation's meditation. And for the most part, when people do it, they'll be upset about it for a little while, but then they'll just kind of get in the groove of doing it because it's just a new thing that they have to get used to. But he really pushed back on it as a thing where it was like, this is so foreign to me that I don't appreciate it because it doesn't come from my culture. And so this debate just kind of got away from us, and it wasn't productive.
Sure. And at the same time, we had sort of this learning moment, because you said you weren't prepared for it. And so as this conversation was going on, you're like, oh, there's a whole other kind of viewpoint that I hadn't considered yet. Yeah. And so what do you make of that?
Well, I guess what I made of it was that I need to have like a little bit more of a prepared response for that kind of pushback.
Yeah.
And have a way of asking questions that leads him to understand that this isn't inappropriate to borrow from other people's cultures when it's helpful to ourselves.
Sure. Sure. Because my guess is that you should share secular mindfulness in your class.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so helping him make that distinction would be something that, and others down the line, because obviously that's not an uncommon response. Rare, but not uncommon. Yeah?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious about a little something. When you're opening people up to this concept of mindfulness, how do you present it?
Well, when I present it, I talk about how how we've developed a certain way because of our life experiences, and our brains developed a certain way because of our life experiences. And sometimes that can like get us really wound up in anger, being impatient. But what meditation does is it helps the brain kind of rewire itself, because our brains are plastic. So we don't always have to react the same way we always have reacted. We can train ourselves not to do that. It's like practicing.
Wow.
So it's a really good place to practice that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you really tie it into like the through line of your groups, which is all about how we're rewiring our brains so we can be more peaceful,
right,
and loving in our families.
Right. And how this is just a place to practice, you know, like it's not,
yeah,
you don't have to do this outside of here, but just practice it here.
Right, just give it a shot here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to what degree do you go in between the difference between it being secular and also religious philosophy?
You know, I really don't even hit on the religious philosophy of it. I mean, my other facilitators tend to do that every once in a while when they're trying to maybe like teach a little bit more about it. But I've really just stayed on like a very secular way, so it seems like inclusive to everybody.
Okay.
And so I've never really presented it as a religion or as a part of someone's religion.
Right, you're just like, you present it as a secular practice.
Right.
Yeah, it's anything that anybody might do,
yes,
no matter what their beliefs are. Okay. So, you know, given this kind of journey, this little moment you had with this person and recognizing, oh, there's some things that I might want to tweak a little bit so that people can understand this difference, and also so that if they don't want to participate, they have something else quiet that they can do other than eating snacks, opening bags of chips, whatnot. What comes up for you? What ideas do you have to kind of move that idea forward?
I don't know. I guess I was like trying to figure out, because what happened during the discussion was I would bring it up in a way where I'm like, no, it's more of a secular thing, and then he would be like, yeah, but it came from this Eastern philosophy, and so he kept pushing me back here, and I was trying to say like, no, this is what's happening. This is how we're presenting it.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't really unlatch from that idea that it was a religious philosophy. So I guess I'm trying to like figure out how I can talk about where a modern mindfulness came in, and maybe be more knowledgeable about the origins of mindfulness in the United States, if that makes them feel more comfortable with practicing it.
Yeah.
But that was really the only thought I had about it.
Okay. Well, I have one. Is it okay if I throw it out?
Yes.
So it's my guess that there may be folks from time to time who are really kind of not yet ready to engage this concept that you're sharing, this practice that you're sharing with them. And it might be helpful for them to have an option. And so when you lay it out and say, you know, and if this isn't something you want to do, what options, like if I was your group member, what options would I have?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of options that people would have without them being distracting options. Because like the first thing that came to mind was like, well, you know, you could, when I'm bored or something, or when I'm not feeling like I'm part of something, I kind of like to draw a little bit. But then I think, well, then everybody in the group is going to be like, why meditate when I can do this drawing thing? Or just take in the idea of doing different types of meditations every time with the whole group.
Oh, that's a good one.
Whether that's like a stretching meditation, a drawing meditation, I don't know what other kind of meditation I could do.
So, you know, guided, you know, brief body scans, anchoring your, all sorts of different ideas and options in regards to that. Even having like pre-recorded ones from, you know, some of the thought leaders in meditation, that sort of thing. They're brief and get at the time. So, so one of the ideas you're kind of coming up with is the idea of like, okay, if I was to give some people some options, what would they be? And I'm just kind of wondering what it would be like thinking back to this gentleman, what would it have been like to say, okay, you know, that's cool, you don't feel it, and we're certainly not going to force you to do it, because I assume that's your vibe.
Right.
What other quiet things could you do? And just kind of get the ideas from him.
Yeah.
What do you think of doing something like that?
I like that idea.
Yeah?
Because I think my first reaction was, I need to convince you to do this activity that no one else seems to have a problem with. But I like the idea of putting it back on him and making it more of a group decision.
Yeah. Just kind of sourcing his like interests, like if it's reading a book, or coloring or whatever it is that's going to be quiet. Okay, good. Anything else that you want to check in about this situation before I kind of wrap her up?
No, I thought that was really helpful.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what the plan is. And so there's a couple points. One is you're going to kind of continue to sit with how you're exposing the concept to them to make sure that it's really clear that this is just a practice that, you know, Google does and all sorts of different people do in a lot of different contexts, and continue to keep in all that beautiful science and the thread of how this is helpful in regards to kind of settling the amygdala down and all that. And then when folks are not quite disposed to it yet, you're just going to kind of work with them and find out what quiet options they might come up with, and allow them to do that. And if it starts to get out of hand where everybody's drawn instead of meditating, then we'll figure that out then.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We good?
Yes.
Well, beautiful. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah.
It's great hanging out with you.
Yeah.
All right.
So hopefully that was provided some further detail in regards to what I shared before. And these team conversation prompts that you see up on the screen now evolved since that time. And so some of them weren't applied in that demo. And plus, I'm terrible at following my own structure. But this is the idea, is that you want to have the person check in. You want to have them describe what happened, which hopefully you heard in the demo you just saw, the facts of the situation. And what this does is just gives the listener sort of a grounding in regards to what it is that's going on, whether it's personal or professional. And then if the feelings don't come out, you invite them out and ask them, what were you thinking and feeling when this was going on? And then just kind of guide them through thinking about, you know, what did they get out of it? Kind of like Marianne's concept of paradoxical learning. Okay, so you had this little schism happen in group, and what did you learn from it? You know, failing isn't failure. Failing is often learning. And we feel like we fail sometimes, and it's helpful to have a listener with an accepting, aka non-judgmental vibe that allows us to explore this in a safe space. And then you help them put together a little bit of plan as needed, as you heard in the demo. And one prompt here that has evolved since that demo was made is asking the person, what do you need from me? And when I'm in space with people and we do a demo of this in a room, and it's a real live demo where the person's coming in with a real situation that they want to discuss, explore, and I ask, what do you need from me? Oftentimes the answer is nothing. I just needed someone to talk it out with. And so hopefully this is helpful and to you in regards to how we might apply the concept of holding space, not only with the people we serve, but also with our team members, so that we all can be well and do the work. Speaking of wellness, it is time for us to explore a wellness plan. And we have come to the determination that you already know what you need to do to maintain your own wellness. And so we've given you a couple of things to support that. To support you giving yourself permission to take care of yourself. One comes from Marianne, and you can see it here. It is a permission slip. And if you were to go to Marianne's abode and look on her refrigerator, you would see one of these completed. Sean, tell them what else they've won. We have some additional optional homework to guide them through the process of identifying something that works for them. And so on page 4 and 5 is a little self-care assessment. And then what you do is you take your findings from your little self-care assessment onto page 6 and pick out one that you want to start to practice to make a little bit of a plan about it. And the purpose of doing these wellness plans is so that at least you've identified a thing versus thinking about which thing should I do. I've decided to do this thing and I'm gonna try and do it, and I find out I don't like it, then I'm gonna try a new thing. Or I find out that I like it, then I'm gonna add another thing. However that rolls for you. So the purpose of these little handouts is really to kind of give you an opportunity to give yourself permission, like Marianne was pointing out, to identify what specifically you're going to do to take care of yourself. One of the things that helps us to help ourselves and help others is to ensure that we have a common awareness of how we're doing the work. What's true is that if I'm a part of a team and the person next to me thinks this way and I think that way in regard to doing the work, that creates a little bit of a collision. And when there is, a difference of opinion, we need the same framework to discuss how we're going to apply our services in service to a given individual or group of people. So one of the things that, like Marianne made it simple earlier in regards to assessing our own wellness. How do I feel at the beginning of the day? How do I feel at the end of the day? And our whole journey has been about how to simplify things, because when I was coming up, it was all seemed very technical. It seemed very impossible a lot of times. And then I came across this piece of data that I shared with you in the last module, and that is that it matters more how we're doing what we're doing. And so that how is described here as far as I'm concerned. And that is, I need to have a common awareness amongst my team in regards to how trauma shows up with people. I need to have identified approaches that help the people I'm servicing get better and heal up. I need to be respectful of a person's identity. That's where the cultural humility piece comes in. I need to know how to communicate and listen very effectively to the people I'm serving because of time constraints and because I want to have a positive and healthy impact on this person. And so that's where motivational interviewing and holding space comes in. I want to make sure that my team has a way to maintain their own wellness, whether that's on site at the place of business. So for example, I used to work for a rather large organization of 300 employees, and we brought in mindfulness, and we had mindfulness groups ongoing. We had yoga groups at the end of the day. We did all sorts of little things to help the caregivers take care of themselves. And if that is only giving them permission, not giving them permission, supporting them to give themselves permission to do so, then that's a really good thing too. And then if I am a leader of teams, a program manager, administrative director, the CEO, the accounting manager, director of development, whomever, whatever my role is, and I'm a leader, then I want to be able to create opportunities to hold space for my team, much as we explored. So that's our 2 cents on how to create this healing focused environment. And I was talking about how, and there's what, but there's also
the why.
Yeah.
And as Sean knows, this is one of my favorite things to talk about is the why. We can tell people what we do. That's easy. And we can often tell people how we do it, but we can't often tell people why we do it. And the why is so important because it really touches on our finding purpose within ourselves and meaning in what we do. And again, this brings me back to a story that I heard about an exterminator who loved his job. And he could tell you what he did. He was an exterminator, and he could tell you how he did it. He showed up and he trapped rats, or he, trapped cockroaches or whatever. And when asked if he enjoyed his job, if he found it meaningful, he said yes. Now, this is someone who had had numerous jobs throughout his adult life, and they'd always been for a paycheck. Now, a paycheck is not the why. The paycheck is the end result. The paycheck is kind of the bonus at the end of the day. And he had experienced a lot of job dissatisfaction. And so he was always looking for that next job. What else can I do? Because this job is unsatisfactory in one way or another. And then he came across this extermination role and he took it. And as the story goes, he got trained and he did it. And so when it came to this interview and they said, well, what is it that you love about your job? Like, well, why, how long have you been doing it? He says, well, I've been doing it, X amount of years now. And I find a lot of meaning in it. And one of the things he loved was that he felt he was helping people. Like, his why is that he really loved helping people. He would come into a room and see people standing on their desks or on their chairs or on their bed because they saw a cockroach or a rat or a mouse or something. And he could come in and sort of put them at ease and say, it's okay, I'm here. And then he would do what he does and he would leave. And while he was doing it, he would have these conversations, he would get to know these people, he loved people, and he loved helping. And so the why of his work was finally satisfied in this position that I think, for me personally, I couldn't be an exterminator because I'm squeamish around bugs and rodents. Like, that's a job I would call this guy because I can't do this job myself, right? and I would find that job like, whoa, no. But he loves it because he found meaning in it, and he enjoys helping people, and this gave him a great sense of purpose, and it was something that he could do that he knows that a lot of people do not want to do. So when we look at the what we do, that's easy to answer, and we look at how we do, and that's pretty easy to answer too. Like in the last video, you know, I'm an art therapist, and I talk a little bit about how I do it, but I didn't share why I do it. So this concept comes up from Simon Sinek, and he has a concept called the golden circle, and the golden circle is this: the what, how, and why. And he talks about the importance of your why, and it's a 20-minute YouTube that you can watch, and we can include the link for that. And when we look at the why, like the exterminator, he loves helping people, and this was one way that he found great meaning in helping others in something that he could do.
Healing-focused care, together or its components, whether it's being aware of how trauma shows up, taking care of ourselves, applying motivational interviewing in the form of holding space. Those are all journeys. All of those are journeys. Cultural humility is a journey. Reflective supervision is a journey. That means that I need to continually focus on establishing what I'm doing well at and what I can get better at. Both of those are important. And when I know why, the purpose of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, then it supports me to go on those journeys.
Very nice.
And so now we've made a little movie of our whys.
I believe that everyone has a story to tell. I believe that everyone has been through something that has made them stronger than they even know. I believe that through compassion, guidance, and the lessons of my own experiences, that meaning can be found in loss, that healing can be discovered after trauma, that purpose will be the seed that springs forth from the soil of what has been and provide others with the fruits of love to share. I believe that one seed provides many apples. I am an artist, a writer, a storyteller, an art therapist, and in all of these ways, a gardener, tending to the fodder and compost in the lives of not only myself but in others, so that the seeds of healing can be planted, one by one, fostering growth so that each person can experience the bloom of their own spirit, the bounty of their individual purpose, and collective impact for a kinder, gentler, more loving world.
I believe trauma is at the core of all ills. I believe holding space provides guidance of how to be with trauma survivors, healing their wounds, how to listen, develop self-awareness, raise consciousness, and put the person in charge of their healing. This is important to me because I believe it is my purpose and my role in support of the healing and sustainability of our planet.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Sean and Marianne, that was a great program. I feel like just, you know, as the moderator listening in, it gave me a lot of great insights just for myself and, of course, our viewers as vocational rehabilitation professionals and counselors. I think these things are really great for folks to keep in mind and understand. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I know people have a lot of questions, so I am going to run away and hand it over to Beth so that she can take your questions. We'll take as many as we can in the time remaining. If we don't get to your question, we are keeping track of all the questions that people have, and we will be answering them later on our community of practice. That's also where our webinar archives are. So if you're curious about some of the questions that are being asked and we don't get to them, there will be answers for you when the video comes out and that page is finished. So Beth, I'm handing it over to you.
Thanks, Heidi. Actually, we don't have too many questions today. We do have a question from Christine that she popped into the chat earlier. So we'll start with that one. Christine asks, what is the difference between vicarious traumatization and a PTSD trigger if it is regarding a past trauma of your own? And Marianne, you're on mute right now.
There we go. I saw that and I'm like, yeah, I was just asking Sean if it's all right if I jump in and grab this one. So the vicarious trauma actually can be stemmed from unresolved trauma in your own life. Oftentimes that is bringing up that trigger. So as we talked about in here, the identification of triggers, what is it that you are responding to? And, again, I'll use a personal example. Is I had a client at the beginning of my current career who had a very tough day, we'll just put it that way, and ended up like standing over me as the therapist in the group room and yelling at me about, everything she could possibly think of, about everything that was wrong, and placing that blame on me. And the interesting thing is I sat there and I was so triggered by her. And when I went in for my reflective supervision with my supervisor, it turned out that this person's her reaction, it triggered something in me that hadn't been resolved. And she reminded me of this time I got yelled at by a family member in that same way. And so it was like, as Sean and I had mentioned, it's really important for all of us to identify our own traumas and our own triggers so that we have a better understanding of why we're emotionally reacting to something. The work we do for ourselves in this way will benefit how we present with the people that we serve. And it's not to say that you won't still be triggered, but you'll be able to identify that trigger and kind of stay out of the re-bringing that up. So I can't stress enough about doing your own, really going in and doing your own work and trying to get those traumas resolved. Seeing a therapist, seeing who, Sean and I often recommend the helpfortrauma.org, Sean?
Sure. I can never remember either. It's either .org or .com.
Right. It's one of those two. But it's a great program. And there's many programs out there, but this is one that I'm familiar with on trauma resolution. And I often say, like as an art therapist, I make my own art. And I would not go to a preacher who doesn't pray. Like an art therapist needs to make their own art. A preacher needs to pray. And if we're working with people who may be traumatized, we need to resolve that too. And when we think of it in those terms, like, oh yeah, I would never go to a church where the preacher doesn't pray, right? So it's important for us to explore our own selves and figure out where those triggers are. And if we have PTSD, to start to reconcile those on our own so that we can be more present to the clients we serve.
Marianne and Sean, can you repeat that website again quickly for people?
Yes, it's helpfortrauma.org.
.org.
I'm
going to put it into the chat box.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. We also had someone in the chat asking for a link or a handout for that why model that you mentioned. Would you be able to either pop that in chat or send it to us so we can include it with the recording?
Looks like Sean is working on it right now. If anyone wants and they're listening, you can just Google Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. He did a TED Talks. It's a 20-minute TED Talk, and it's called The Golden Circle. And he's a very engaging speaker.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question comes from Danielle. Asking, what are your thoughts towards the benefits on clinical trauma groups versus one-on-one sessions?
Well, that is exactly what I do. They're both, I think that both side by side are very important. So one of the things that people feel when they have experienced a trauma is that they feel isolated and that nobody is going to understand. Nobody understands how I feel. I'm all alone in this, etc. And where I work, we do individual sessions, which you get once a week. And then you are in the group for the rest of the time, like whether you're coming to a group just for a couple of hours or you're coming to a group all day. And the beautiful thing about the group dynamic is that even though everybody has their own unique situations that bring them to the group, everyone's traumas are your own. Period. But the thoughts and the feelings that we experience because of these traumas are pretty much the same. So everyone goes through feeling isolated and alone. Everyone goes through these feelings of why me, so there's commonality. And what I find in the group dynamic and working through trauma is that people start to build those relationships and have this understanding that, again, they're not alone, and then they have support, and then they feel safe to talk about it, and it's beneficial. Now, sometimes you can't go into great detail in a group because the group is, so large and you have limited time. So that's where the individual can help as well. So for me, when I'm looking at helping people go resolve their trauma, I think both the individual and the group together are beneficial.
Thanks, Marianne. All right. Our next question comes from Deirdre, asking, is there a good way you can recommend that a counseling professional can find their own therapeutic group to join? I'm in Milwaukee. I've attempted to connect and have had 2 counselors since moving to the area. However, the matches weren't that great for me.
Yeah, that's a tough one. When I was in Milwaukee, I'm now in Charlotte, North Carolina. I went through my company's EAP, and it's really important to find that good match. It's really important because when you don't get that good match, you're like, not good. There's other words that come to mind when you don't get that good match. So sometimes you can, I don't know, Sean, if you have a link or.
I have a couple ideas. One is that with the advent of Zoomness in our current situation, there's a lot more online available. Therapists and other healing professionals are, becoming more adept at this. In fact, I was going through a little something over the winter, and the fellow I found was awesome. But you're absolutely right, like Marianne's indicating, is like, finding a therapist or a group is like dating. You've got to find the right one, and sometimes that takes a little while. So my encouragement is to keep at it, and also to maybe consider broadening your scope to an online setting.
Mm-hmm. And again, you can usually type in, for instance, if you have traumas that you're trying to work to resolve, you can type in, trauma therapy for a counselor. And I add that in because people who are in the service field, like counselors and therapists, as Brene Brown puts it, our BS factor's a little high.
Right.
We need someone who can challenge us in a way that we can't use our words to navigate around, right? So it's really important to find someone who can challenge you and sustain you in that way. So be specific in your internet search and see what comes up, and then try it on. As Sean said, it's like dating. You gotta kind of go through a little bit to find the right one.
Thank you both. Next question comes from Karen, asking about anger. Saying a lot of her clients are experiencing trauma and re-traumatization from Mr. Floyd's death. They're experiencing a lot of anger, as is she.
And so, I'm sorry, I missed the question. That's certainly something we're experiencing. What was the?
Yeah, it's not really phrased as a question. So Karen, if you want to hop in to the Q&A box and clarify a little bit.
Because I want to talk about this in just a second, because this is super important.
Yeah, so, I completely agree. So go ahead, and Karen, if you want to, clarify or, add in a little bit more to your question, feel free to pop that in the Q&A box. Thanks.
Yeah. So this is affecting this. The murders of George Floyd and others recently is affecting everyone in a different way, and in a deep way, from my experience. A lot of service providers are experiencing it. A lot of folks are struggling with how to be helpfully responsive to it. There's a lot of things going on in that regard. But the main thing that's happening is it's triggering historical trauma for a lot of folks, especially if they share George Floyd's identity. And it is really bringing to light that this is our common unhealed wound. And what needs to happen, and we've had opportunities to do this recently, where we just hold space for each other to share out, to allow people to share out their voice of what's going on with them. There's no fixing going on. There's no therapy going on. It's just folks getting together and sharing out their experience, and just sometimes, just that little bit alleviates some of the tension, because all of that is under the surface, has been under the surface for some time. And because of the murders, it has been spiked, triggered, and opened. So it is super reasonable for not only the people that we're serving, but also service providers to be experiencing anger, such as the person put it. At the same time, we can figure out a way to hold space for each other, to work through it, to heal through it, and to find a way to move forward together.
Thanks, Sean. And Karen did pop into the Q&A and said, how do we process the immediacy of this anger?
Well, and I think in my response, I would just refer you back to what I just said, is that a healing circle, a check-in circle where folks can just come together. You want to have agreements in regards to, and these are very simple, and I can send out a sample of agreements that's helpful, and you just teach each other about the agreements in regards to how you're going to operate in the healing circle. We, as you probably gathered throughout our time together, I'm primarily a trainer of motivational interviewing. And we have an ongoing peer learning group. And instead of doing the skills this week, and in fact today, what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be having a healing circle around this very topic. And so it's not business as usual. And there's a lot of good information on the web in regards to how people are experiencing this, responsive to their own identity. And I would encourage you to take a gander at that, to really kind of tune into it in different ways, and find ways to hold space for each other and for yourself. Marianne.
Yeah, beautifully put, Sean. And I one of the things that really resonates with me with what you said was, this is not business as usual. And I think that's key to remember. Yes, people are going to be experiencing a lot of anger. They're also experiencing a lot of sadness, and having someone to listen, having that space. So I want to say ditto to everything that Sean said, to provide that space where people can be heard, and just allow them to be angry, allow them to be sad, allow them to voice what they need to voice, and then take those next steps after that. But it isn't to fix or mend, but I think part of the anger is that it's been built up. Again, the historical trauma. So it's been built up over so many years, and so many murders, and so many injustices. And so it's just that pressure of all of these years of experiences that have come to a head. And we do, as a collective whole, need to do something. But I think for the most part, where we can start is actually listening. Why is that person angry?
Yeah. And another thing I would throw out there is cultural humility as a framework for ensuring that I'm on a path to becoming culturally reverent. And once the healing circle is done, this provides a structure for folks to continue the journey, to ensure that we don't end up here again. I went to my first protest because of my son a few weeks ago, who's very active. And the sign that, one of the signs that stuck out at me is that I can't believe that I'm 68 and I'm still protesting this explicative. And so this is a moment in time that we need to, get all that energy out and then focus it. And the framework of cultural humility provides a way to focus that.
All right, moving on to our next question. This one comes from Angie. Can you please talk about addictive behaviors like food as a negative outcome for women who disregard their bodies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I am not an addiction specialist. My specialty has been more trauma, but oftentimes that is a reparative behavior. That is when someone is looking to sort of fill the void. So anytime we use drugs, alcohol, food, even over-exercising or under-exercising, anything that we're doing in excess or so much of a lack is a reparative thing. We're trying to find either a sense of stasis, like homeostasis, or we're trying to suppress something. And that's when it's a maladaptive tool. How to reconcile that, again, really goes back to addressing the trauma that has occurred. You know, a lot of times bullying, body shaming, sexual abuse, prolonged sexual abuse, sexual attack, all of those things, and start to resolve the trauma. And one of the things that I believe, and I believe I can include Sean in this as well, is resolve the trauma and see what's next, see what's left. So when we work to resolve that trauma, you may see some of there won't be a need for those behaviors anymore. I just had a client the other day say that he uses drugs to try to escape the emotions he doesn't want to deal with. And he hasn't dealt with his trauma. And it was like, maybe we should try that. So that's the kind of the start for me. I know that's hard to get to. But there are a lot of specialty programs out there for people with eating disorders. I say people because men do have them as well, although they're more commonly seen in women. But I know that Rogers Memorial has a nationally recognized a disordered eating program. Yeah.
Right. The next one is asking, do you do any trainings such as breathing relaxation or something like yoga? That will be something that most of us would like to have, especially right now in our current situation with the pandemic and everything that's going on.
My turn or your turn?
Well, why don't you go first, Sean?
So what I would refer, as far as mindfulness meditation goes, if you're in the Milwaukee area, and they may even have things online at this time, is Growing Minds. Growing Minds is an organization in Milwaukee that has been training mindfulness to schools and human service professionals for a long time. They're very skillful at it. They've got a great structure for it. In regards to yoga, I believe that there are quite a lot of the yoga studios that are going online. I believe the hot yoga in Milwaukee, you can't quite, or maybe you can replicate the hotness of the yoga in your space, but you can still do the moves. And I'll tell you, I've been doing a fair amount of yoga recently, and it's super helpful. And one of the reasons is because that when we are stressed out, we carry that tension in our body. And also when we've had experiences of trauma that have become traumatizing, we hold that in our body. And what yoga does is it allows us to release that physically, and also allows us to be in touch with our body, so that when we're getting triggered and our shoulders get up, then we notice that we're getting triggered and we can do something about it. If I'm not in touch with my body, it's still going to have that reaction. I'm just going to be in tune with it. So those are two great paths for you to explore. And those are the two ideas I have for you.
Well, Sean, I was thinking of the wellness day that we often do as a part of the, yeah. So Share Training offers a wellness day. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that or include the link.
What I would say is that if you go to our website, which is everywhere in the handouts, I believe, you'll see not only the Wellness Day, but also how we share cultural humility to cultural reverence, which I saw a question in here. So yeah, we're happy to help out or refer you on to wherever might be helpful to you.
Yeah. And same, here's where technology can be your friend. I do a lot of meditation. I teach meditation for the clients that I serve currently. And we also offer yoga as well, because we know that those things are very beneficial. But given, I'm not in Wisconsin, where I think many of you are, although this is reaching a national audience. I saw someone contacting in from Arizona, I believe. But our phones can be really beneficial. I have numerous apps for meditation. You find one that works for you, or online yoga, etc. So there's a lot of tools available to do that. And to Sean's point, it's really important to be in touch with your body and how it's responding to the stress, so that you can decompress from it.